Chapter 15. It was somewhere over Nevada that I thought about Marcella and how much I needed to just lay my eyes on her again. I had wasted so much time when we were together hiding away from her, mainly when I was carrying a new injury. Maybe a part of me didn't want her to see the toll my body was paying for my choices. Like she would see what I considered a good idea and think twice about whether she wanted a man with that level of intelligence in her life. Maybe I didn't want her to see them because I didn't want her to worry, or maybe I simply didn't want to show any weakness around her. Maybe I was a prideful idiot who didn't know how good he had it until it was no longer his. Christ, what a fool. When I got back from Japan was a prime example of the kind of behavior that drove her away. I limped back into the country. She picked me up at the airport, and I put on a front. When I could, I retreated to the Gibson and licked my wounds for a few days. When I could no longer avoid her, I would only be around her in PG situations so she wouldn't see the mess I had made of my back going toe-to-toe with the most brutal man in all of Korea. I was fielding calls again before the wounds had fully healed, which meant by the time I felt like I could disrobe around her, I had already booked to main event in Vancouver for a few nights. Marcella, as usual, couldn't just phone in and fly off. She had real-world commitments, proper responsibilities. I had a serious pain med problem and CTE on the next run of my professional ladder. The lean days I had in Canada early in my career taught me to earn when you could, whether it was convenient or not. We were in the midst of a quiet fight when Rick Jurado, a promoter out of Tijuana, called and offered me some serious cash to wrestle a few nights in his company. He had bust his ass to raise the profile of Latin American wrestling, or law, having snapped up most of the guys that GCW had to cut from their roster. It was my time as FWF Warrior Champion that made me his must-have final piece of the puzzle to capture the attention of those wrestling fans close to the U.S. side of the Mexican border. I hit pause on our quiet fight in favor of a rowdy one that would pay me well. Packed a bag and pocketed the airfare Rick had wired me in order to drive down and save myself some extra cash. TJ wasn't always somewhere you'd want to be alone after dark. I was a tank of a man, and I still made sure the doors were locked as I rolled up to a red light. Two kids sat curbside chopping watermelon with machetes. Automatic gunfire rattled out as two trucks tore by my right side mirror, taking it with them. A police cruiser gave pursuit, looking slightly unenthusiastic to catch up. I rolled up to my detached wing mirror, popped open my door, and lifted it up. Normally, I'd drop my bag off and go explore the city, but nothing about my first night in TJ was inviting. I checked into my room, ordered a pizza, and pondered whether Marcella would pick up if I called her from the road. I met the guys at the gym closest to the stadium where Rick walked us through the schedule. I was main eventing in a steel cage match with the Urban Commando. I'd worked with him when we were both on the way up and never enjoyed it. He was a bodybuilder by trade, but had never valued wrestling as an art form, as a way of expression and telling stories. He also never gave a shit about anyone other than himself, which ignored the golden rule of wrestling. You make sure the guy you're working with exits the ring in the same condition he enters. There was a boxing ring in the gymnasium, and knowing how much work I needed to put in to get Urban through a bout, I took to it and encouraged him to join me. We worked through a handful of beats we wanted to hit. I wanted to try and lock down a roadmap for the fight. His attention wandered off, out of the ring and into the city streets. "How many stray dogs do you reckon there are in this place?" wondered Commando. I looked at him. I damn near looked through him. He was the color of a well-hydrated piss and chewing on his bottom lip, We were trying to make sure this thing went to plan and that both of us walked out of there, and he's blabbering about stray dogs. Derek, you want to try focusing for a moment? We're going to have a cage match. People are coming here expecting a show, I said. Sure, we'll give them a show. I was just thinking, maybe there's some way we can work them into the bit. Raise some awareness of it. Awareness of what? The stray dogs? You want to bring the stray dogs into the ring? I asked. Why not? He asked. I looked at Rick. What the hell had he done? Why did he think I could mold 6'3" of crazy into a functioning wrestler? I had already taken the money. Rick never paid any of his boys up front. I should have known that a fix was in when he filled my pockets before a bead of sweat was spilt. I knew the only way through was to double down. I was going to eat, sleep, and shit with him by my side until the match was done. Every opportunity to get him into a ring and work out some of that rust that was holding him together was going to be taken. When the final bell at the end of the pay-per-view rang, people were either going to remember the Urban Commando's greatest match or would have witnessed another in a long line of wrestling car crashes, the stink of which would follow you around until you could prove to the world and its booker that you weren't to blame. I entered the ring first. The Urban Commando insisted upon it, and I didn't give enough of a shit to argue about it. I watched him come down the ramp and was just relieved he didn't have an army of stray dogs with him. Wrangling him was going to be hard enough. The Mexican crowd couldn't have been more different to Japan if they tried. They cheered everything. They threw bottles left and right without much of a reason, and half of them wore luchador masks. Urban climbed into the ring and pointed his fingers towards me like a handgun. We paced around the ring as the steel cage slowly descended from the rafters, and the crew secured it to the floor. The ref, Greg Finney, called for the bell. Jim Cantwell was on announcements. He'd been released by GCW at the same time as a lot of the guys, and Frank put one of his nieces in his place. We made our way to the center of the ring and locked up, collar and elbow. Urban leant in and said, "I've been thinking about the ending, Jack. I don't like it." Jesus Christ. This was not the time to call it on the fly. "Derek, we do it as called or we ain't getting paid." I hit him with a hip toss. It took him down onto the mat where I tied him up in an armbar and leant in close enough to whisper some sense into him. "Look, let's do tonight the way it's planned, and then we can look at tomorrow. Tomorrow." The Urban Commando fought his way back to a vertical basis. He hit me with a few shots to the breadbasket. The last one caught a rib for real. A crunch echoed through my body. I grabbed 2 fists of his hair and snapped him hard down to the mat. I took off to the corner, took a knee, and huffed in as much oxygen as I could. Suddenly, my head, neck, and chest was squashed against the turnbuckles as the Urban Commando hit me like a locomotive. We hadn't planned that any more than we'd planned him cracking my rib. He pulled me to my feet and hit me with 5 or 6 knife-edge chops. I had him wrap my right leg around the middle rope and stomp some hell into the inside of my thigh. He backed off at a 4 count, and I dropped to the canvas, clutching my leg while discreetly feeling around the rib. Son of a bitch. I got to my feet, selling a hobble. Urban came on me with a sweep kick. I threw myself backwards onto the mat before straightening the leg out, all but placing it in his hand. I called a figure 4. He looked at me like he was cooling soup. Greg tried to talk him through the steps, but he turned my leg the wrong way, which would have broken it had he tried locking it in. He wasn't taking any of my warning, so I kicked him off me and rolled back out of the way and onto my feet. He came charging my way with a meaty arm extended. I ducked out of the way of the clothesline, but he still managed to catch me on the ear. I came up behind him and grabbed hold of him in a full Nelson. Take it down a notch, you sloppy bastard, I warned. Who the fuck are you calling sloppy? Snapped Derek. I've counted 2 receipts so far. You want to avoid them tonight, you'll take heed. Now side Russian leg sweep into a Boston crab, and you crawl to the ropes. I hit the leg sweep. The crowd was growing into the match. I stuck him in a Boston crab, but without his legs, he didn't have the strength to crawl us towards the ropes. I straightened up a little and took a step back to give him some leverage. Then again and again until we finally got there, and Greg was able to call for the break. He pulled himself up onto the second rope. I turned him around and started caning him with punches. Greg hit me with a 4 count before stepping in, pushing me off the urban commando and palming him a blade. He went to the mat, clutching his face, and when he came up, the crimson was mixing with the sweat and was running wild. I went back at him. Greg made a move to stop me, and I swatted him like a striped fly. I grabbed Derek by the hair and ran him to the other side of the ring, tossing him over the top rope and into the steel cage. The sound echoed across the stadium. He rolled back into the ring. I grabbed him again, raced back across, and introduced him to the other side of the cage. I climbed to the top of the steel. The crowd was howling. The urban commando rolled back into the ring and raced up the turnbuckle, just as we planned. We were to come off the top together in a superplex, but Urban had changed his mind. He grabbed me by the seat of my pants and tossed me from the top of the cage. I landed heavy. That chicken shit son of a bitch. Urban came off the top rope with his elbow extended. I rolled out of the way at the last minute. He'd gone into business for himself. Fuck this guy. He had a wallet's worth of receipts coming his way. I had tried to bring him into line, but it was clear he was looking for a shoot match. I grabbed hold of the middle rope and pulled myself to my feet. My lower back was screaming at me, burning white hot and cramping. Urban got to his feet and mouthed, "What the fuck, bro?" I grabbed hold of his arm and pulled him in close enough to throw a sleeper hold on him. Then I tightened my grip. He began to freak out and started tapping on my arm for me to release him. I clenched tighter still. He fought it for a few seconds, and then he went limp. I dropped him to the mat, rolled him over, and put my foot on his chest. "Fucking count it, Greg," I snapped. 1, 2, 3. Ding, ding, ding. The crowd sat still, wondering, is that it? The match was just getting hot, then all of a sudden we were over. They went from hot to a vacuum, but were quickly getting pissed off. $30 a head for this. The winner of this bout, the Lone Wolf Jack Gecko, called Greg. I got out of the ring, grabbed my travel bag, and put TJ in my rear view. I changed back into my clothes in line to cross the border back into the United States. When I got back, I drank myself to sleep. I couldn't shit for a week without crying. When Marcella called, I let it go to the box. I kept the blinds down and the door locked until I was able to walk again. She knew I had hurt myself again and was avoiding her, which only reinforced everything she knew to be true of our relationship. It would ease for a time when I retired from the ring, but then I went full-time as a Seamus and swapped out weeks on the road for nights of broken promises. Missed dinner dates and the occasional injury that would see me retreat back to my boat. By the time she found out she was pregnant, I had already removed my clothes from the top drawer of her bureau. The seatbelt symbol came on as we circled around for final approach. I needed a nap, a shower, a shave, and then to see the mother of my baby. I cleared security and went straight to long-term parking. The Cougar was still there, with only the dried coffee stain I'd left there to devalue her appearance. I flopped into the cold leather seat and welcomed the familiar embrace. I was truly home. I drove back towards my boat, but found a thick black plume of smoke that clogged the sky to my right and enticed me in its direction. As I drove towards it, a feeling contorted in my stomach. I knew exactly where the plume was taking me, where the fire trucks and curious pedestrians were headed. With my foot off the gas, I gave way to the emergency services as they poured, single file, down Pacific Boulevard before hanging a left. I parked up on the corner of the block and scanned the onlookers for familiar faces. Arsonists typically stuck around to watch their work, keep the professionals busy, and since they'd set my office ablaze, it stood to reason that the proud fire daddy was someone I'd irked over the last few days. There was one figure that stood out. They clung to the perimeter of the gathering crowd in a hooded jacket and disappeared when the team from KNCLA turned up. I watched as the cold water slowly began to win out over the thick-cut black smoke and licks of orange that flicked out from where my windows used to be. I got in my car and watched the curious bystanders get bored and disperse like so much of the water into the city's drains. They had taken out my building to stop me from seeing Nina's final autopsy. If I kept pushing, what else would they do? I drove back to the boat and was on the pier when I saw Marcella standing aboard my '41 Gibson. She was round, so beautifully round, and clutching the pistol I'd bought her. I reached for my own before remembering I'd locked it away for safekeeping days ago. She waved me over. "I came by to leave you something in your fridge that wasn't molded when I caught this one breaking in," she said, pointing inwards with the barrel. Inside sat a dark-haired woman in her early 20s, in a hoodie with shoulder-length hair. Next to her was a messenger bag, which I assume Marcella told her to empty out. Next to a purse sat a manila folder and a plane ticket. I kissed Marcella on the head and invited her to lower that thing while we went inside to join my unexpected guest. "How are you enjoying the City of Angels, Officer Suarez?" I asked. She smiled, though that was probably due to Marcella easing the hammer of her gun down and setting it on my kitchenette counter. "I can't stay long," she said. "You set fire to my office. You'll at least stay for a drink." I countered as I took 2 beers from the fridge and eased the caps off before handing her one. As she took it, I pulled her to her feet and placed her against the wall. She understood what was going on and accepted it as part of the trade-off. After patting her down, I offered her the beer again. She took it and slugged deep into the bottle. I leant against the doorway. "I'm assuming flying to L.A. to burn me out of business wasn't your idea." She shook her head. "That was Hawkins." "Hawkins? He a beady-eyed little fella who's never seen a fried meal he didn't like?" I asked. "That's him. He's chief of police in Burlington." "He knew I was coming to meet you. Did you give me up?" "I'm new. He doesn't trust me yet. My guess is he had someone listening in on our call because the moment I got free, he had one of his boys pull me to one side and tell me I was coming to L.A. to do something for the department." She reached for the manila folder, and as she did, Marcella put her hand on her gun. "I brought this to replace the one that burnt up." Celine raised the document carefully, then tossed it in my direction. It was the final autopsy. I flicked to the section on stomach contents and saw it. Chipped tooth, 0.2 carat diamond. "This is what they didn't want me to see?" "Why?" she said. "I don't know." And I believed her. "Who's pulling Hawkins' strings on this one?" "I don't know." "Why, is my friend dead, Officer Suarez?" "I don't know." I was getting frustrated with all the closed doors I was pushing up against. Hawkins knew. "Maybe I should come back to Burlington with you and beat it out of Hawkins." "I wouldn't do that, Jack. He's dirty. Filthy, really. He has every drug dealer in the city in his pocket. He sent me here to put dirt on me so he could keep me in line." "He's dangerous," Suarez said. "You were first on the scene. What did you see?" Celine sipped on her beer, then broke it down. It was an exercise in ordinary. It had been reported as an unconscious female requiring medical assistance, so police were called to secure the scene in case of a crime. Suarez was 2 blocks away, so arrived before the paramedics and attempted CPR, but Nina was already gone. She secured the scene, and when the medics arrived, went about taking witness statements from the staff and other guests at the Burley. I handed in my report and went end of shift like normal. When I got to work the next day, Hawkins had skipped the rotation and put one of his drinking buddies from the detective pool on the case. This guy comes to me, drops my report in my lap, and says, "You made a few mistakes in your report, Boot." "But don't worry, I fixed them," said Suarez. "What did he fix?" asked Marcella. "I'd written that there were signs of a struggle, overturned furniture, the stuff they teach you to look for. He took that out completely and stated there was sufficient drug paraphernalia on site to heavily infer an overdose. Surprised that asshole could spell paraphernalia. He had me sign it, and that was that. But that's not the kind of cop I want to be. I didn't join up to pervert the law." I opened the door to the Gibson to air out the place. Hawkins' bullshit was clogging up what little sanctuary I had. At the gate, by the entrance to the pier, stood a tall man who was doing his best to see and be unseen. He was in a hoodie like the guy at the scene. "Anything crop up about someone called Dawson?" I asked. "Crop up? Like in an investigation?" "No, there's nobody I know by that name," Suarez replied. "Did you come here alone?" I asked. "Of course." "Then we might have a problem." I stepped out onto the deck, walked along the side of the boat, and unhitched it from the pier. On my way back to the door, I stole another look at the man by the entrance, and while I couldn't be certain, I would have laid cash on it, being the cop who'd tried to intimidate me and disliked my ice bucket. I popped my head into the living quarters and told Marcella she should sit down before climbing the steps to the wheel. With a turn of the wrist, the Gibson's engine roared into life and threw gallons of water up onto the pier as I woke it from a prolonged slumber. Our friend by the entrance was on the move, back towards his car. He was green enough to think he could make a pursuit of it, and I welcomed him trying. "Stay out of sight for now," I roared as we left the concrete behind us. We sailed down along the coast until we got to Manhattan Beach. I aligned the Gibson with the pier there and got us as close to the sand without getting us stuck. Much to the annoyance of the $8 an hour kids they had manning the lifeguard tower, I thanked Celine for sticking her neck out, then told her straight that she had done enough. Her best course of action was to get back to Burlington and act like everything went exactly as planned. The tail at the entrance hadn't been there when I arrived, so there was a good chance he was following me, which meant he didn't see Celine at any time. Marcella and I watched her as she waded to shore and off in the direction of LAX. No cab in the city was picking her up soaking wet. She had a good 2-hour walk to the airport ahead of her, which would give her more than enough time to practice what she was going to say when she got back and Hawkins pulled her to one side. After much screaming from the boys in the little red shorts, I turned the boat around and headed back in the direction we had come. Marcella appeared beside me. She was wearing my Lone Wolf Letterman jacket and had let her hair down. She reached across me and killed the engine before guiding me back onto the deck where a blanket was unrolled and atop of it, 2 plates of pasta. I helped Marcella down to a seated position as gracefully as I could before joining her. This was probably the most amount of time she'd ever spent on my boat. She took a sip of my beer and handed it back to me. "How much danger are you in?" she asked. "They ran me out of town and set my business ablaze. If I let them think they've beaten me, then I'm in no danger at all." "And will you? Let them think they've beaten you?" "I'm not after them. Hawkins and his PD goons are little more than the cleaners. I'm after the guy who killed Nina. I get him. I'll get the ones who covered it up, I said. When dinner was finished, I turned the engine over, got my bearings, and took us back to the marina before I walked Marcella back to her car. She opened the door, then turned back to say something. In the moment, I mistook it for something else entirely and kissed her gently on the lips. She accepted it without fully reciprocating before asking me to pick her up in the morning for her appointment.